Hi, and welcome to the I Teed Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 64. What game of telephone teaches about proxies? So, telephone, the game. I don't know what to say on this. If you've ever been a small child with a lot of other small children and had nothing to do for an extended period of time, you might have played this game. Specifically, it's a game where you start out with a single phrase or statement, and you're supposed to pass it along to each person down the line, and they repeat what they heard, and eventually the last person in line says out loud what they heard. And it's a game that kind of demonstrates how people communicate and how simple variations or alterations in communication can lead to big changes. So you can start out with the word tiger and end up with "I ate eggs this morning." That's how the game of telephone works, and that's essentially what it does. It's kind of a boring game if you play real games as a person. Maybe I shouldn't pick on those who find entertainment in telephone, but maybe it's just not the most entertaining of games. There are other games that are like this, less known. There's one called Drawception, which is essentially the same concept, except you alternate between interpreting what a drawing is, and writing down a title or descriptor for that image. So you can have an image of a cat. Someone draws a cat. Cat steadily becomes a mouse, depending on the talents of the drawer. And the guesser sees, instead of seeing a mouse, sees Santa terrorizing a group of elves. And yeah, it can get out of hand really quickly. And so these kind of games, like I said, they just illustrate how differences in communication can lead to misinterpretation of data. And that is also what can happen with proxies. So what a proxy is, in the strictest terms, a proxy is just a path of communication that you are steering traffic through. Now, you can consider a lot of things proxies in the world of networking and computers. If you have a specific server that takes in traffic and feeds it to another server, or feeds it into specific lanes on that device, that is typically done through what we call a proxy. There are also web app proxies. There are different classes of proxies. And all you need to know is that they do basically the same thing. They funnel traffic through to direct paths. And there are different ways that they do that, or that they can do that. But essentially, it's the same thing. They take traffic from one direction and move it into another direction based on where it's supposed to go, or the characteristics of the traffic. And the cool thing about a proxy is that it allows you to take in more traffic than you normally would for a specific or have more services available than you normally would as well. So, you can have a service for, a website, and then you can have a service for audio streaming. You can have a service for, whatever. And you can host it from the same location instead of having to separate an IP address for each and every service that you're trying to offer. So proxies are really useful. But another way that you can use proxies is to communicate out to the internet. So, for instance, this is what we utilize a lot in business cases and business use cases, and specifically in like a highly secure facilities that need to identify traffic going out. They'll have specific proxies configured. Now, you can consider any firewall a proxy, but I don't want to get lost in the weeds. Having a strictly considered traffic proxy for outgoing traffic is essentially where you are funneling all of your internet-bound traffic through a specific path and allowing it to go or be blocked based on specific types of information. So this isn't to be confused with like a DNS black hole, where essentially when you resolve a name, it doesn't go anywhere. This is, you're literally sending traffic through, and if it matches the characteristics of traffic, of specific types of traffic, it's either allowed or denied. A proxy can do that. A proxy can also do things like deep packet inspection, where you can see inside of the communication of every connection on that. It can see inside of that data and identify the information. And so deep packet inspection also allows you to do things like, hey, I want to see if anybody's leaking my data. I want to see if anybody's trying to steal from me, things like that. Deep packet inspection can help with that. A proxy also allows you to do other things like SSL decryption, which can be a part of deep packet inspection. A proxy has a lot of needs and or has a lot of functions that you can identify and utilize. And so whether you're sending traffic out or accepting traffic in, a proxy is useful. And so in the path of a proxy, you are allowing the traffic to transfer over a specific area, and you can see this traffic, and you're basically taking traffic from one person and handing it to the next, which is kind of like how the game of telephone works. You're taking one bit of information from one person, and then you're passing it along to the next person. And while you have this data as the proxy, you can affect it, which is where we get into things like man-in-the-middle attacks. And so what a man-in-the-middle attack is it's exactly what it sounds like. There's somebody between you and your destination, and that person is malicious. And they are going to do things to your traffic or do things to your packets to perform adversary functions or malicious activity against you or your target. And so what man-in-the-middle attacks really, really boil down to is a proxy. They essentially take that traffic and they manipulate it in some way. And it's really scary for a lot of people to identify, to hear that word man-in-the-middle attack. And it can be very frightening if there are if the vulnerability is easy, it doesn't have a high complexity score and so on and so forth. But what you have to remember for man-in-the-middle attacks is typically a man-in-the-middle attack is not something that can just be done. You can't just attack somebody man-in-the-middle without having some sort of access to the back-end systems of either the target or the destination. So in understanding that it's not something that is necessarily going to affect each and every person on the internet or each and every person on a network or each and every person everywhere. Man-in-the-middle attacks are not something that can just be done. You have to have some level of control already. So just keep that in mind as you're looking at it, vulnerabilities, and you hear the term. It sounds scary, but it's actually there is complexity surrounding it that makes it less so. But anyway, I'm not trying to devalue or remove the seriousness of man-in-the-middle attacks. I'm just trying to highlight that aspect of it. Anyway, moving on. So in a game of telephone, one of the things that can often happen, especially, with shitty little kids, is that you have a kid who purposefully wants to change what's being said. And so, he'll say poopy or whatever when he's telling the next person the information that he heard. And that's essentially an injection attack. He is purposefully changing the data for his own needs and wants. Typically, these kids are doing it just for the shits and giggles of it. But sometimes, it's just seeing what happens. And this is essentially where man-in-the-middle attacks or injection attacks occur. And the way that most attackers will implement this kind of man-in-the-middle solution or injection attack is they will set up a proxy on a target machine and specifically target or target specific traffic that is going out of that machine. So it doesn't affect everything you do. It only affects your traffic to a specific endpoint. So for instance, if I, as an attacker, know that your business does a lot of its work in Microsoft 365, I'm going to set up a proxy to the various Microsoft 365 endpoints that you use the most. So like Outlook or Outlook.com or SharePoint or Teams. I'm going to set up those, basically a proxy that targets those web addresses that funnels that traffic to wherever I want. Sometimes an attacker will funnel it right back to that machine and host the malicious pages right off of your own machine. This is something that they can do. And the entire purpose of this is so that they can collect whatever data you're sending or intercepts credentials or so on and so forth. There's a lot of different things that they can do with this kind of setup. And if they have the ability to kind of set up a proxy, they pretty much have administrative control over your device if they're able to install a proxy directly on the machine that you're using. It means they have administrative control, which also probably means that your privileged access management hygiene is not great. But without going down that rabbit hole, when you see this kind of activity happen, it can be very, very difficult to spot as an end user because your computer can report that data. They can be masking that traffic so that it looks like it's actually coming from your computer so it looks like it's actually coming from whatever destination. It can be very difficult to track if you're not paying attention to how the behavior of the machine and how things normally operate. And what I mean by this is you can essentially have this traffic appear to be normal traffic. And as a user, you're not going to see that difference without some significant knowledge about how to identify traffic. So, for instance, one of the ways that you can prevent this as a user or as an administrator attempting to resolve potential man-in-the-middle attacks or proxy attacks is to have a DNS solution that is essentially session-based. And what I mean by that is there are certain DNS filtration or content filtration services out there that identify traffic inside of the browser. And when they are identifying it in the browser, they are comparing the traffic paths to known good traffic paths. So if all of a sudden your traffic shifts away from what is normal, it identifies that as anomalous and can stop that traffic in its tracks to alert you that there is something going on. There are a couple products out there that'll do this. And as I said before, I'm not going to tell you what to go buy or intimate what's better than others as far as products are concerned, because I'm not a shill. But needless to say, if you go and you search session-based content filtration, you'll probably come up with a couple of good solutions. And really what you're looking for is a solution that can identify that traffic and identify what it's supposed to look like versus what your computer is doing. Because this is also important when you're looking at data or looking at other kinds of attacks like phishing attacks or authentication in the middle attacks and things like that. These types of solutions can prevent that. So anyways, got off on a tangent with that. But essentially, what this does in a game of telephone is is essentially having a teacher there that's like, nah, see, that was not part of the game. You just said whatever you wanted. And I say teacher because, again, I'm imagining this group of little kids waiting in a fucking hall in school playing this game, because that's the only time I've ever played it as a human. I'll leave that wherever. Anyways, there's also a lot of other ways to identify this traffic. If you have any sort of, I don't want to call it XDR because it's not really that, but if you have an EDR that can identify network traffic as well, a lot of EDR solutions will also do this sort of analysis for traffic and basically route identification on the system. Or at least they should be doing it. The good ones will, the bad ones won't. So, having this traffic and identifying it and being able to see it will prevent users from falling for this kind of attack, or at least help them to not communicate sensitive information or hand data to the bad guys. And so that's what a lot of this can do. And that is essentially how proxies can be used maliciously in an environment. But again, to get back to the core point, proxies are essentially, just you taking information from one person and handing it to another person based on the characteristics of that traffic. And characteristics, I say that because they can literally be anything. It can be whatever the destination is. It can be the source. It can be the content of the data. It can be the types of ports that the information is supposed to travel over. It can be the sensitivity of the data. It can be the types of cookies that the data contains, things like that. And so proxies are a very powerful source, and you are a very powerful resource. And if you are interested in hosting networks or hosting data or having any services exposed to the internet, it's a very, very intelligent thing for you to do to enable a proxy, an incoming proxy, to help you handle that traffic. Not only that, but proxies are also a really good way to prevent your data from being compromised, to prevent your service or your website from being compromised. And I would suggest that if you host a service, you should always host it behind a proxy, if you can, because that will give you the opportunity to identify malicious traffic. It'll give you the opportunity to stop malicious actors from doing things like denial of service attacks, birthday attacks, Christmas attacks, anything like that. It'll allow you to prevent those attacks, or at least give you the opportunity. Whereas if you just host a service or server straight up to the internet, you don't necessarily get that same functionality. So, all that being said, I hope you guys have a great day.